Welcome from Twitter, Deb Roy.
Thank you. So I'd like to share a couple of thoughts with you about the fascinating convergence of Twitter and TV. And sitting through the sessions this morning, there's so many amazing things that are happening, so many moving parts. I'm just going to really speak to a couple of select topics. The first is I just want to bring up the concept of a soundtrack. And as you're all aware, movies began their existence as silent affairs. And in fact, audiences spent a couple of generations experiencing movies with no sound or with a piano accompaniment. And then eventually when the technology for synchronized soundtracks was perfected or good enough to get out into theaters, of course, the whole movie experience was transformed. And the way that I like to think about what sound did to the silent film is it made the medium whole. And it was not something that you had to spend a lot of time explaining to an audience where the value was. In fact, it was something that the audience sought out, and it was natural to have the sound accompany what people had always been seeing. And in terms of the impact it had on the creative side of filmmaking, of course, it unleashed an explosion in creativity. So if we fast forward a few generations of filmmaking, can you imagine E.T. without the soundtrack? Jaws without the soundtrack would be a bunch of silly robotic fish just splashing around in water. Instead, it was a movie that kept people out of water. So it had this profound and permanent shift in the medium. So if we think about Twitter, and now I have a role at Twitter, but if I just sort of, from a personal point of view, try to make sense of what Twitter is, probably everyone in this room is on Twitter and might have a slightly different view of kind of holistically what it is. Here's mine. I think there's really two sort of foundational facets of the platform. On one hand, it is a live information network. And if there's any doubt about that, I think the whole world sort of understood because of the tragic events that happened right here in Boston just a few days ago, that if you wanted to know what was happening now, Twitter was the place to get the stream of information. And the other element is that it's a live social network. So it's the mashup of a live information network and a live social network. And when you put those two together, so this is where all of us can chime in, can react, can respond, can share. And you have these two together in one platform. A natural byproduct is a kind of social soundtrack for events. And if you then take that definition of Twitter and say, well, what happens when you bring it next to TV? I think it's quite natural to sort of anticipate what has happened, which is we've got the fastest growing live sort of medium for audience communication that is being connected with, of course, the original live massive medium. And we have this creation of a social soundtrack for TV. And I just wanted to sort of, I guess, point out one point which I think is kind of interesting is the live nature of both Twitter and of course, live TV makes it a kind of natural plug-and-play sort of pair of platforms. And one of the efficiencies of Twitter from a TV audience point of view is you don't have to do a lot of work to explain what it is you're talking about. Because there is this emerging consensus view that if the thing you're trying to talk about is happening now, it's live, that you can just assume that other people on Twitter will share that kind of synchronous view. So I wanted to share a quick example where I experienced this, just to kind of get across one aspect of the impact of having this kind of social soundtrack. With a large part of the rest of the country, I was tuned in to the presidential debates. The second debate, Mitt Romney uttered the now regrettable phrase, "A binder's full of women." And at that very moment where I first heard it live, I was sitting in the living room with my wife, and she immediately groaned and said, "I can't believe he said that. That was horrible." And I thought, well, it was clearly a mistake. It was damaging, but I thought she was overreacting. And so we had kind of a focus group of two in our living room. And I didn't think the damage would be as bad, close to as bad as she was she was suggesting. And then I looked down at my phone. And immediately, my Twitter feed lit up. You know, the jokes started rolling out within seconds. There needs to be a binder woman party, open bar, Big Bird can work the door. And in general, just the sarcasm and negativity, just the scale and systematic response from all the people that I've tuned in and follow was pretty clear. And in that moment, you know, within a minute, my interpretation of what had happened on TV was permanently altered. So that's impact. That's an audience feedback loop that changes literally how I encode what just happened on TV. Think if you're a marketer, think if you're creating programming, the kind of real-time impact on how you actually encode and remember what happened. Turns out 2 minutes later, I could have swore I heard the President of the United States of America say gangbangers. And I turned to my wife and I said, did he just say what I thought he said? And she said, no, I didn't catch it. And literally, the next tweet I read on my phone was from my friend and board member, Brian Beadall, who in his pithy way tweeted, well, you can read it for yourself, prediction, we will soon learn about binders full of gangbangers. My wife wasn't on Twitter at that point in time, so I read her the tweet. We shared a laugh. And so the social soundtrack of television flowed naturally into our living room. So it's not, as everyone I think in this room knows, it's not just reserved for use around debates. It happens with sports, including little micro conversations, people responding to each other in this live mode, talk about shows. Ads, if they're provocative, if they're the right kind of sort of genre of advertising, can drive massive amounts of volume. And when you take all of this and sort of ask what's the cause-effect pattern, on one hand, clearly, as television drives impressions, as sort of classically measured by Nielsen, it's always been the case that people talk about what they watch. Now we can see this at-scale signal of the number of people who are translating impressions into expressions. And those expressions are flowing through a network and having impact like the impact that that handful of tweets had on me while I was watching a presidential debate. And so there's both now an ability to get this kind of at-scale view of what is engaging audiences by looking at the degree of expressions and the content of those expressions, and to then measure the spread. And we're going to be hearing from our friends at Nielsen about some new ways to measure this kind of spread later this afternoon. So I just want to share one piece of fresh data that is I think, pretty cool in terms of, you know, if there's any question, does good television content drive conversation? Is the cause flowing in that way? The answer seems clear. Of course it is. This is a minute-by-minute plot of the number of tweets that a movie, when it aired 2 different times on 2 different channels, 5 days apart in the UK. It's the second sync data. And just sort of the remarkable thing is how similar the contour of these 2 audience response signals are. So, you know, the cause effect from TV to conversation on Twitter, I think is quite clear, at least for this piece of programming. Equally clear, in my opinion, is the effect of all that conversation, the impressions that are being driven on the social side in terms of show discovery and tune-in behavior, and perhaps most subtle and yet most powerful, the way we encode what it is we're viewing, because there's this social layer that goes on top. So some of you know that I was a co-founder of a company called Bluefin. What Bluefin was set up to do was create sort of a data layer that tracked all the people in the social side that were publicly visible. We created the industry's first sort of complete real-time sort of machine-readable feed of what's on TV, both programming and ads, and then linked these 2 layers of data. So every time someone tweeted or posted on publicly on Facebook about a piece of content on US television, we would basically connect the dots. And we would know that audience member talked about that moment on TV. And we started to provide data and analytics to both marketers and to television networks to better understand their audience and make actionable shifts in how they went about their business on TV. As you might know, Twitter about 3 months ago acquired Bluefin. What this means is that those analytics capabilities that I just showed you in that brief visualization are being brought into Twitter, and as Ali Rogani announced during the acquisition, they will power a whole new set of capabilities, both on the advertising side and the consumer experience at Twitter. So this is really a recognition at a large scale that this audience-driven movement of forging a social soundtrack out of Twitter is being recognized by Twitter, that it's necessary to organize the content within the Twitter pipes in order to create new capabilities. And so there's exciting stuff that's coming ahead. And also, just about 2 months before that acquisition was made public, a very important partnership with Nielsen was announced, where Nielsen and Twitter committed to creating a social TV ratings that will be sort of designed and brought to the market by Nielsen. We're going to hear about that, I think, in about an hour, so stay tuned for that. I want to end on one last point, which is, when I think about what happens when you take the combination of Twitter and TV, and here's my favorite keynote transition of the presentation. Keep your eyes on the X. What actually happens is something that's more like a multiplicative force. So this is just sort of something I've been toying with recently, which is to take Newton's second law of physics and think about how it might apply to the world of media. So there's this idea that if you take a piece of media, like a piece of video, and think about the force or impact it has on its audience, that there's really two components. The mass of the media, which I'll define as the lifetime reach of that piece of media, and the social acceleration that operates on it. So here's the idea. Take a piece of video, and let's say it was time shifted and viewed, say, by a person every day over 100 days, 100 people saw that piece of video, versus 100 people who watch the same piece of video on one day. I hope some of you share the intuition that the second case is going to somehow have more impact. That video is going to have more impact. And I believe it has to do with the synchronicity of the experience and the ability for audience members to know and recognize that they're not alone in having that experience. And the way this plays out in media is, if we imagine, first of all, a piece of time-shifted video, and we look at its impact. We have a person who is here in an engaged state. They're watching this piece of video, and because they know no one else is watching it at the same time, they're less likely to send out any kind of a tweet or post about it. They'll sink back to sort of unengaged. They'll move on to the next thing in life. And as you, this is the first time I've actually looked at this. So there we go. He's sinking down. And now we see the next person watch the same piece of video and is in an engaged state for a while. And at some point, we have someone who actually decides to send out a message, typically for something that's time shifted as, hey, you should check this out. No reason to assume that the others are watching at the same time. And if we now fast forward over time, this piece of video actually has a very high reach. Okay? Over the lifetime of the video, a lot of people view it, and sure enough, over time, some people are talking about it. But in general, is a lot of silent consumption. And if you then contrast that with a piece of video which is not only social by nature, but enjoys something else, which is simultaneous broadcast, good old-fashioned live TV, you have two things acting in its favor. Number one, you have a very different picture of how the video is delivered, simultaneous. So now you have all of the audience members simultaneously engaged, and now the kicker is Twitter, because you have a go-to live intra-audience communication medium that allows this kind of live conversation to ensue. And even as the live video fades, the game is over, there's post-game analysis, and as the dust settles on all this conversation, what you're left with is, I hope you see sort of an image of a kind of collective long-term memory of that original piece of video, where both the mass of it is large, but so is this acceleration term. And I believe that Twitter is literally changing the media equation for the kind of acceleration that can act upon a piece of video. And that, to me, feels like a kind of structural shift in potential impact for pieces of media. And exactly how this new ecosystem is leveraged, I think we saw already, I saw this morning some stunning examples of sort of new creative forces to leverage the social soundtrack. And I think it's exciting days ahead. Thank you.
Joining Deb is Mike Crew.
Nice to be at the front of the stage for a bit. Deb, thank you. That was awesome. You looked at your slides for the first time at Holliday. We call that keynote karaoke.
Thank you.
So look, you mentioned the acquisition of Twitter, which happened super fast. Bluefin's offices are now affectionately referred to as Twitter Boston. What's happened to the Bluefin product, the Signals product?
So we're honoring all the contracts that we had active, but beyond that, really this is, we were in the business of sort of measurement and analytics, really from the outside looking in. And now as part of the Twitter platform, there's going to be a transition where we're going to enable new products which will have scale throughout the Twitter platform. So the Signals product will eventually, in terms of a standalone product that is designed, for helping TV planning and buying, will be phased out.
We got a few questions from Twitter, which is kind of meta, asking Twitter questions from Twitter. But this first one's interesting. I want to ask it. I'm really curious what your answer is going to be. It's from Gina Lee. She says, what do you do as an advertiser if the tweets you're receiving are negative? How do you change the reaction from negative to positive? If only it's that easy, huh?
Right. Well, I think the first thing is, of course, and this just goes to what now is kind of the basics of social listening, which is just knowing that actions you're taking are leading to negative reactions. So the first thing you do is stop doing what you're doing. Look for systematic patterns for not just what is it that you did that led to that reaction, but amongst whom. So sometimes you're going to get polarized or mixed reactions. And being able to understand, okay, there's a group of people, might be a few 100,000 people or a few million people that have misinterpreted this in a way that no one up and down the stack anticipated. And hey, this was copy tested, et cetera, but when you let it go sort of in the wild, which is what we now have, this focus group in the wild, that there are reactions that were unanticipated. In fact, we've seen this where sometimes for all the copy testing that an advertiser will do, what they're not able to do is copy test in context. And in certain viewing contexts, the audience's mindset is just in a certain place. Okay, I'm in an Olympics mindset. There are certain things that I'll become more sensitized to actually racial elements of copy that in normal context I would just not tune into, and you'll see a systematic shift in sensitivity. So these are things that are virtually impossible to copy test at scale. So it's noticing fast, having both a reactive layer, and then more strategically being able to go back and understand, so why did that happen?
And take it to heart, and don't blame Twitter for the negative sentiment.
Well, Twitter's it's a medium. I mean, a tweet, every time you think tweet, replace with speech, and then would you take speech to heart? I mean, it really is.
For sure. Cool, one more question. Roxy Fernandez asks, Hill Holliday, Deb, do you think social sentiment tools are relevant, accurate, and how do you think these tools can and will help social TV?
I think that it's sort of by tools, if the question is, full automation of sentiment analysis is, full of complexities and peril, sarcasm and ever-evolving language that people use, on any kind of short messaging is, I think, impossible for the machines to fully keep up with. What our experience from Bluefin is, if you see the sort of sentiment meter slam to, 90% negative and baseline was 30%, there's probably something wrong. So it's a course level indicator. But beyond that, there's a variety of ways beyond sentiment, positive and negative, to do topic analysis in various ways, essentially use the machines to find patterns in data. But our approach has always been to keep people in the loop, to have humans in the loop to make final interpretations and decide what's actionable and what's not. But what's impossible to do manually is sift through what sometimes are millions or even billions of data points and do the pattern discovery in the first place. So there's, I think, a role for each side.
Well, listen, Deb, we know that you were a last-minute stand-in for Fred Graver a week ago. You put this all together. I thought it was fantastic. So a round of applause for Deb, and thanks for being here.
Thank you.